And now we're going to zoom out even more, stepping fully away from consciousness entirely and simply talking about how to engage in ethical research and application of artificial intelligence. To help take us through ethical AI, regardless of its conscious or moral status, we'll be hearing from Jana Scheich-Borg, Associate Research Professor in the Social Science Research Institute at Duke University. For this section now, I want you to take a look at how much time you have left in today's session. If you have at least half an hour left, you should do both of the next tutorials all together as one group sequentially. But if you have a little bit less time, you should split into two groups, watch the next two videos in parallel, one in each group, and then come back together to discuss. You can, of course, always come back to the activities you didn't get to do later. In this section, we'll ask, can AI be safe? Can it respect privacy? Can AI or its creators or users be responsible?
We're going to focus on 3 ethical issues relevant to neuro-AI in this session. As we work through them, remember that even if you aren't deliberately working on how to make AI more powerful and generalizable, which you might be, the ways you use AI to understand the human brain can still be used by others to make AI more powerful and generalizable. This means our neuro-AI work can have many unintended consequences, including those caused by other people using the tools and knowledge we create in ways we didn't originally intend. With that in mind, let's start with our first ethical issue, safety. AIs are already being used to do things like determine what part of someone's brain is going to be stimulated and when, direct where weapons will detonate, and determine who will get organs or vaccines when there aren't enough to go around. When AI goes awry in any of these situations, there can be life and death consequences. So, any of the work we do in neuro-AI that contributes in some way to AI being more effective can have life and death consequences too through applications such as these, especially when our code or models are open source or used by people with bad intentions. Further, remember, the more effective and efficient AI becomes, the more efficiently and effectively bad actors can use it to carry out their nefarious intentions at massive scales. So our work can have direct impacts on safety even if we don't realize it. There are also more nuanced safety issues to be aware of. For example, in addition to the fact that AI will of course make mistakes, sometimes people trust AI too much, or rely on AI so much that they fail to keep their own skills up to snuff. When this happens in medicine, for example, a radiologist may accept an AI's incorrect diagnosis. In transportation, a pilot, driver, or captain may look away or get distracted because they think, it's cool, the AI's got this. But as a result, they miss it when an AI makes a mistake and gets them into a dangerous situation. And once they're in that situation, their now rusty skills may prevent them from responding quickly and effectively enough to prevent an accident. To be clear, these are not hypothetical scenarios. They've already happened, but they don't always happen. So the issue is that we still don't know how often people will put too much trust in AI or in what circumstances. Finally, there are concerns about how AI could impact our existential safety. Consider this famous scenario posed by philosopher Nick Bostrom. Suppose we're in the business of making paperclips. We get our hands on an AI system that is smarter than humans, and so we put it to work by putting it in charge of our paperclip production process. To do this, we instruct it to maximize the number of paperclips produced. This sounds sensible and harmless, right? Dutifully, the AI starts taking actions in support of our instruction, and all is good, until it isn't. Since our instructions don't include anything about when to stop making paperclips, the AI continues to try to make paperclips even when we no longer need them. And it tries to do so in the most effective way possible. It basically turns the Earth into one incredibly big paperclip factory. In fact, it launches a space colonization program to turn other planets into paperclip factories. Of course, we try to stop it, but since it's smarter than us, it anticipates our actions and outmaneuvers us at every step to make sure we don't get in the way of it making more paperclips. And since it quickly becomes clear that humans are making it harder for AI to do its assigned job, it launches a nuclear bomb to eradicate human beings, and it succeeds. Humans are toast. The point of this famous example is that the AI in this scenario was never programmed to be evil, and it never had an explicit goal to harm us. It also doesn't need to be conscious or sentient to do what it did. Nonetheless, due to our inability to anticipate the consequences of our original instructions, humans and other life are eradicated from Earth. As dramatic as this scenario is, the general idea motivating it is relevant today, not just in the distant future. Many companies are currently pouring investment into agentive AI that can take actions to pursue goals in the world. These are AIs that can take a prompt like launch a website that allows people to track their anxiety over the course of a day and actually write and execute that code and launch it to create a fully functioning website that does exactly that. These agentic AIs aren't that good right now, but by the time you're taking this course, they might be much better, and they're almost certainly going to improve dramatically over the next few years. Even if they aren't able to launch nuclear weapons anytime soon, we hope anyway, hopefully you can see how these types of AI systems that interact with real things and systems in the real world could still get into the kind of trouble the AI did in the paperclip example, namely causing unforeseen safety risks, even when the original purpose of the AI seemed to have nothing at all to do with safety. Okay, now let's talk about another ethical issue, privacy. AIs have already been used to do things like predict your sexual orientation from your online browsing habits, create sophisticated phishing attacks to get your banking information. And they've already been hacked through what are called model inversion attacks to do things like reconstruct images of people in a model's training data or determine whether a participant in an AI's training data cheated on their significant other. And yes, that really happened, and they can predict it with 86% accuracy. Now imagine that today's powerful AI models start incorporating neural data, perhaps through incorporating data from home EEG devices. With neural data in the mix, it seems even more likely that AI will eventually be able to accurately predict aspects of what you feel or what you think, even if you don't want people to know that information. And to be clear, it's fine for you to freely give permission for AI to retrieve this information about you. But AI threatens our right to privacy when it causes us to lose control over who is given this information about ourselves and when. Another aspect of privacy is the right to be let alone from interference or intrusion, and more positively, the right to develop an identity that is separate from the surveillance, judgment, and values of our society and culture. It's not hard to imagine how the types of AI systems we were just discussing that are trained with EEG data how they could be, start being used intentionally to interfere with your actions or thoughts when it predicts you're in a mental state that it is trained to label bad, like if it thinks you aren't paying attention to what you're supposed to be paying attention to. It also seems very plausible that companies could pressure their employees to agree to this type of monitoring, at least when they're on the job. People living through these experiences clearly aren't being let alone. Further, AI systems that predict things you may want to keep private, like your political affiliations or sexual orientation, are already being used to intimidate some people away from doing things like participating in protests or attending certain cultural events. When AI is used in this way, people clearly are not free to develop an identity that's separate from all this stuff I listed up here. So we need to think hard about how our neuro AI work impacts privacy. The last ethical issue I want to talk about in this section is responsibility. Imagine this. A person with an AI-driven neuroprosthetic has learned to use a machine gun, which is a right U.S. citizens currently have, at least under some circumstances in the U.S. While the person is using the machine gun at a shooting range to do some perfectly legal target practice, tragically, the prosthetic makes a mistake and decides that the person wants to pull the trigger, even though the person did not actually want to pull the trigger at that moment because the person was still getting the gun in position. As a result, the trigger of the machine gun is pulled by the prosthetic, people in the vicinity are shot, and they die soon after. Who is responsible for the deaths of these people? The AI, the person with the prosthetic, the owners of the gun range who are supposed to be monitoring who uses the guns, the company who created the prosthetic, the company who trained the AI that's used by the prosthetic, the surgeon who implanted the prosthetic knowing full well the patient enjoyed recreational shooting, the government who allowed the person to have access to the gun in the first place. All of the above? None of the above? This is a fictional example that, thank goodness, has not come to pass, but similar questions of responsibility plague examples of AI harms, like who should be held responsible when self-driving cars get into accidents. And answers to these questions are still being worked out and debated. I'm bringing this up because the fear is that if nobody is held responsible, or at least responsible enough for AI harms, people aren't likely to invest the kind of effort necessary to make sure the harms are avoided. So we need to figure out who is going to be held responsible for both AI's foreseen and unforeseen harms so that we can incentivize actors to minimize them. The other reason I think it's important to talk about responsibility is that it can be very tempting for us as scientists or engineers to think, look, I had good intentions when I contributed to or used this AI technology. I'm not responsible for how it's used by others or mistakes it makes later. But that's a dangerous line of thinking. Consider one more scenario. Imagine that during a famine, two parents leave their young children alone and walk to another village to get food for themselves. Meanwhile, their children have no way to get food, so they die of starvation. Someone might say the drought was responsible for the famine. Still, the parents had a responsibility to feed their children. The courts may or may not hold the parents legally responsible. Nonetheless, the parents were morally responsible for their children's deaths. The first use of the word responsible means simply that the drought caused the famine. The second use of the word responsible means that the parents had a duty or obligation to feed their children, presumably because of their role as parents. The third use of the word responsible means that the courts will not impose civil damages or criminal punishment on the parents. And the fourth use of the word responsible, it means that the parents deserve or are liable to negative moral sanctions, such as blame and anger. These are all different notions of responsibility. An AI may have caused a harm, which is the first notion of responsibility, but AI researchers and developers might still have duties and obligations related to the harm, which is the second notion of responsibility. We might also be liable to legal punishments related to the harm, such as fines or in prison time. But we also need to think hard about the fourth notion of responsibility, whether we're morally responsible for an AI-caused harm, even if we can get away with it legally. With all this in mind, we are ready for our breakout session.
And now for a discussion. Head to room 1 if you want to talk about how we can maximize AI safety. Head to room 2 if you want to talk about how we can protect our privacy from AI threats. And head to room 3 if you want to discuss how we can decide who is responsible for AI behavior. Then come back all together to discuss.